Welcome to our third official project of Concepts of Programming. In today's video, we're going to start Super Pong. So, for this project, we're going to create two different variations of the Pong game, neither of which are going to be exactly like the original Pong. Now, since we're creating two different modes, we're also going to be working with a lot of new concepts like buttons, variables, operators, sensing, etc. So this project is going to be split into two videos. Today, we're going to create the easy mode and part of the home screen. Now, just like with any other project, we're going to start with the blocks needed. With our previous projects, we covered a lot of the motion, looks, events, and control, and we're still going to be using those. But another concept we're going to be using is variables. So the way variables work is it's not only a concept in Scratch. In every programming language, we have this idea of variables. What a variable is, and the way you can think about it, is imagine you have a container that can store any value that you need. In Scratch, this is just going to be a number, but imagine you have this container that can store one value and one value only. What we're going to do to create a variable is we're going to click the Make a Variable button, and it gives us a couple options. Now, variables have two main things you need to know: the name of the container itself, and then the object you're storing inside of it. So for the name, I'm going to name it score, because in this project, the variable we're going to need to keep track of is going to be the number of our score. So the value we're storing inside of the container of this variable is going to be the score, in this case starting with 0, and then the name of the container, or the name of the variable, is just score. So with Scratch, the first thing that happens is this little round box thing appears, and it's going to basically show up on our playground screen, and it's going to give the name of the variable and the value. Now, there are four main blocks that we can use to change the variable. The first two talk about the actual value. It allows us to set and change the variables. So right now, I'm going to change and set the value of score to 0, or if I set the value of score to 10, and I click on this block, right here the score is changed to 10. The next thing we can do is we can change the score, and right now it's saying change the score by 1. So when I click on this, score increases by 1. So the difference between set and change is set directly sets the value of score to 10. So no matter what value score is right now, it's going to set to 10, it's going to become 10, it doesn't matter what value is currently inside score, we're going to set it to 10. But if we change by a positive number like 1, what it's going to do is it's going to add 1 to my current value of score. So it's going to take whatever value of score I have right now and increase it by 1. And if I want to decrease, I can turn it negative, and it's going to increase it by -1 or decrease it by 1. So setting the score changes the value directly to whatever number I put here, and then changing the score is going to change it up or down based off of whatever score I have right now. So for now, we're going to set our score to 0. Now the next two blocks look at the appearance of the score. So just like with our sprite, where we were able to go into the looks and choose whether to hide or show it, we can do the same thing with this little variable box. What I'm going to do is I'm going to be able to show variable score, which is going to make this appear, but I can also hide variable score. So when I click on the hide button, it's going to make the box disappear. Now the important thing to note is that even though my variable score isn't showing on screen, I can still change the value. The variable is still there. It's always going to be there. So if I set the value of score to 10 now, the value of score is still going to change to 10. So when I show it again, it's no longer 0, it's going to be 10. So even if it's not showing on screen, I can still change the value of score. For the most part, we're going to make it stay. So we've covered pretty much the basics of variables. And the next thing we're going to look at is back in motion. So the next thing we're going to cover is going to be bouncing. With our first project, Move the Cat, we covered a lot of the ways to move our cat. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a movement. So I'm going to have it glide 1 second to here, I'm going to have it move here. And I'm going to have it glide 1 second to here. So when I click the green flag, no matter where my mouse or my sprite is originally, it's going to glide here and it's going to glide here. So there's a very small problem with this, which is going to be my cat and my sprite are able to go off page, and that's going to become a problem when we program balls, because the balls are just going to keep moving around in random directions, and when it reaches the edge, it's just going to keep going or stay there. So as you can see, if I were to glide 1 second up here, it's just going to stay up here and it's going to try and go as far up as possible. But I don't want that. If I want my cat, my sprite, to be showing at all times in this box, what I'm going to do is I'm going to add this block. If on edge, bounce. And the way this works is it says, if my sprite's location is near one of these edges, I'm going to have it bounce. So I'm going to have it walk over here and bounce off the edge. So when I click the green flag, it's going to go there, but it's going to bounce off. When we code our balls for the ping pong game, what it's going to do is it's going to make sure our balls don't go off the page. So if I have it do this so when I click this, when it reaches the edge, it's going to bounce off. And this is going to be important for our balls in our program later. Now, the next thing we're going to look at is going to be in the operators section. So we already kind of looked at one operator, but what we're going to be doing is we're going to be looking at a couple more. The first thing we're going to look at is pick random. So the thing with pick random is it's going to allow us to pick a random number from this to this. And I can have it move pick random from 10 to 100 steps. So when I click the green flag, it's going to move this amount of steps. If I click again, I'm going to actually have it point in 90, so it's a little bit more apparent. When I click the green flag, it's going to move a little bit. When I click again, it could move more, it could move less, but what it means is that it's going to pick a random number between these two ranges, and it's going to move that amount of steps. So with operators, anything that is a circle can be put inside of the circle values. Now the other thing we are going to be using is going to be these, and, or, and not. And we're not going to look at all of them. We're only going to look at one of them. So the way you can think about or is if I have this value that happens, or I have this value that happens, if either one of these two things happen, then I'm going to do whatever it tells me to do. So as long as one of these two events happens, it's going to run the code. And we're going to provide an example of this. So what I can do is I can say if key space is pressed or touching mouse pointer, touching mouse pointer, so if either the key space is pressed or I'm touching the mouse pointer, I'm going to move 10 steps. And I'm going to put this all in a forever loop. So right now what the code is going to do is it's going to see if key space pressed or touching mouse pointer, it's going to move 10 steps. So if I click the green flag, when my mouse pointer touches it, it's going to move 10 steps. If I click the space key and I keep it pressed, it's still going to move 10 steps. So we're going to combine this with if on edge bounce. So what it's going to do is if the space key is pressed or the sprite is touching the mouse pointer, it's going to move 10 steps, and then if on edge, it's going to bounce. So if I keep my mouse here and I keep it on it, and then I hold down the space key, when it reaches the edge, it's going to bounce. So I'm just keeping the mouse on top of the cat, and then when it hits an edge, no matter what happens, it's going to turn locations and it's going to face in the exact opposite direction. So I'm going to hold down the space key And as you can see, what it does is as long as one of the arguments is true, as long as either the space key is pressed or the mouse pointer is pressed, both of them don't need to happen, at least one of them needs to happen, and then it'll execute the code. Then it's going to move 10 steps, and then if on edge, it's going to bounce. So I don't tell the mouse, and I don't tell the sprite what direction it's going. What it's going to do is when I hold down the space key, it heads out, and it's going to change direction. So the way bounce works is it's going to directly change in the opposite direction. And what this does is that later with our ping pong balls, our balls are never going to go off screen. Once they reach the edge, they're just going to bounce, head in the opposite direction, and they're going to keep going. So we've actually already covered pretty much everything we need to know. But just to review, as long as one of these events is happening, so right now, key space is not pressed, and touching mouse pointer is also not happening, so the code doesn't execute. But when I'm touching the mouse pointer, when the sprite is touching the mouse pointer, or I press down the space key, then it's going to run. If both of them happen, it's also going to run. But as long as one of them happens, it's going to move 10 steps, and then if on edge, bounce. So the way OR works is that if this happens, or this happens, if at least one of these two happens, it's going to run the code. So now we're going to start on the actual project code. The first thing we're going to look at is we are going to create our home screen. So as much fun as it has been coding with this cat, we're going to delete the sprite, and we're going to go to the choose a sprite section in the bottom, go to choose a sprite here, and then we're going to scroll down to the button 2 location. And what it's going to do is I'm going to click on this, and it's going to create this button 2 sprite. So with this, what I'm going to do is I'm going to move this to the center of our screen. And we mentioned in Move the Cat that the center of the screen is going to be 0. So if I choose X as 0, it's going to go into the direct center of the screen. And what this means is that this space here is going to be equal to this space here. And if I want to do the same with the top and the bottom, what I can do is I can also change Y to 0. So by putting it at 0, 0, I'm putting it at the direct center of the screen. This button is now the center of the screen. Now since we're creating 2 game modes, I'm going to move it a little bit down. So the X is still going to be 0, but the Y is going to be moved a little bit down. And what we're going to do is we're actually going to create 2 buttons. Since there are 2 modes to this, I'm going to change my X to 0 and move this down so that we have 2 buttons here. By creating 2 buttons with 2 different locations where the X is the same but the Y is different, what we're saying is I want this button and this button to align. So since their X is the same, what this basically means is that their left and right locations are exactly the same. But since their Y is different, this button is higher up than this button. So the thing with this is we need to tell our user what these buttons mean. So we're going to go to costumes up here, and we're going to look at this costume, and we're going to use the text tool. We're going to click the T, just like we did in our maze project. Click the center or anywhere inside of the button. Make sure you have the text tool, because it's going to allow us to click inside. And then we're going to put in the 2 modes. And for our 2 modes, we're going to call them easy and hard. We're going to select all. We can do this by double clicking. And then we're going to change the font to pixel and change the fill to black. So with these 2, you can change the font and the fill to anything you want, but I like using pixel and black. Then just like with our maze project, we're going to change the size, and then we're going to line up, so we have this check plus here. We're going to line it up here so that the word easy is in the direct center of the button. And then with our hard button, we're going to do the exact same thing. So we have the text hard, and then we're going to change the size a little bit bigger. We're going to move it to the center. And right now we have the appearance of our 2 buttons. Obviously, nothing's going to happen yet because I haven't coded anything. But since now we have our text and our 2 buttons, we're going to code the actual button code. So we're going to start with the easy button. And the first thing we're going to do is, since obviously when I play my ping pong game, I don't want these two buttons on the screen. So I'm going to say, first I'm going to, when green flag clicked, I'm going to show. And then I'm going to say when this sprite clicked. And what this means is that when I click the sprite, it's going to run whatever code is here. And just like with our last program, we're going to look at broadcasts. So I'm actually going to broadcast two messages. The first one is going to be easy mode. And what this broadcast is saying is that I'm going to broadcast a message to all of my sprites and all of my backdrops that we're starting easy mode. Because obviously this is going to broadcast. So when I click this sprite, it's going to broadcast easy mode. And then the other thing I'm going to broadcast is next page. And the reason we're going to do this is that we don't want these buttons to show when we start the game. So by broadcasting two broadcasts, the easy mode broadcast is going to start the game. It's going to tell our balls and our paddles and our floor, which by the way we haven't started yet, but it's going to tell them to show up and start the code. But the other thing we're going to broadcast is next page. And what next page is going to do is it's going to tell everything on this page, or right now these two buttons, to disappear. So when I receive next page, I'm going to hide. So when I click the green flag now, it's going to show. I click this and it's going to hide. And when I click the green flag again, it's going to show up again. So that's pretty much all the code we need for this button. When I click this, it's going to broadcast the message easy mode, which hypothetically is going to start our easy mode because we're going to have all of our other sprites depend on that. And then it's going to broadcast next page, which is going to tell the sprites on this page, or the easy and hard button, that we are moving on to the next page. So with our hard button, it's going to do pretty much the same code. So the way I can duplicate code is I can actually just drag this into the hard button. And what it's going to do is it's going to create a duplicate of the code. So we'll have one green flag clicked show, and we're still going to have the code here, but because I dragged it over, it's just going to copy into this section. Drag this over into here. What I'm doing is I'm actually duplicating the code into here. So now my easy and hard button have the exact same code. And what this means is that when I click on the easy button, they're both going to disappear and we can start the game. But when I click on the hard button, it's going to do the same thing. And there's one thing we need to change about the hard button code, and that's going to be this first broadcast. We need to make sure to change this into a new mode. We're going to broadcast hard mode. And the reason we're doing this is we need to make sure that we're broadcasting two different things. That way, when I click the easy button, the sprites and the things that show up are going to be different than when I click the hard button. So right now we have working buttons. When these two are clicked, they're sending out different messages. They're going to send out next page, which for both of them are going to make them hide. But it's also going to broadcast easy mode for the easy button and hard mode for the hard button. So we finished the home page buttons. In the next video, we're going to improve the home page, but for now, we're going to get started on the easy mode code. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to create a paddle, because we can't play Pong without a paddle. Instead of going to choose a sprite, we're going to go to Paint. And with Paint, we're going to use this rectangle tool here. So we're going to click on this and make sure that this is blue and selected. We are going to change the outline to black, the fill to black, and then change the outline a bit bigger. What I'm going to do is I'm going to click on a location, hold down, and I'm going to drag it larger. So I'm still holding down on my mouse. When I release, it's going to stop. So right now we've created a huge paddle. And I'm going to change the size by making it a little bit smaller. I'm going to line up these so that the X and Y coordinates, again, are the same. And then I'm going to move it somewhere near the bottom. And what this means now is that we have our paddle. And this is just going to be our paddle sprite. Now what we're going to do is we are actually going to name the sprite to paddle, just to make it more clear. And then we are going to start the code. So when green flag clicked, we are going to have it hide, because when we have the home screen, actually I'm going to get rid of this for now, I don't want my paddle to show up on the home screen. But I'm going to say when green flag clicked, hide. And that way we have our nice home screen that doesn't have a paddle. And then what we're going to do is for the rest of the code in our paddle, we're going to say when I receive easy mode, make sure this is easy mode. And this is why the hard mode broadcast is going to broadcast hard mode, and the easy mode button is going to broadcast easy mode. We need to make sure when I receive easy mode, not hard mode, easy mode, I'm going to show. So when I click the green flag, when I click the easy button, it's going to show our paddle. So that means our game's working so far. The other thing I'm going to do is I'm going to find a location for the paddle to start. And this is just going to make our paddle decently neat. I'm going to put it to 0 because we like starting stuff in the center. And I'm going to say when I receive easy mode, I'm going to go to this location. So I'm going to go to X, 0, Y around this time, and then I'm going to start there. So when I click the green flag, if I move my paddle around, easy mode, it's going to start in the center. And then just like with any game program, I'm going to use my forever loop. So with our paddle, we're not going to actually move it up and down. We don't need it to move up and down. We're just going to have it move left and right. So just like with the maze project, what we're going to do is we're going to say if key arrow pressed, then change our X. So we're going to go to sensing, and then we're going to go if key left arrow, and then if key right arrow pressed. Then we're going to move -10 steps for left, because remember, moving negative is going to be moving left. And then we are going to have it move 10 steps for a right arrow. Now, the reason we don't need to actually change the direction in any of these is because our paddle is only ever going to be moving left and right. So if I were to create up and down keys, obviously I would need to change these into direction. So we'd have to change the direction every time, or we'd have to make sure we're changing X by 10 instead of just moving 10 steps. But the idea of this is we now have a paddle that is able to move across the screen and is able to catch stuff left and right. So now we have a working Pong paddle. But the next element of Pong we're going to need is going to be the actual balls. So we're going to add another ball sprite. So I'm going to go to choose a sprite. I'm going to choose a sprite in the library. I'm going to pick the ball, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to costumes, and I'm going to pick one of these colors. In this case, I'm just going to leave it with the yellow. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to start coding the ball. Now, when I click the green flag, obviously the paddle disappears, so we need to do the same thing with the ball. What we're going to do is we're going to, when green flag clicked, hide. And what we're going to do is just like with our paddle, we're going to say, when I receive easy mode, we're going to show. So I'm going to go here, I'm going to show. So when I click the green flag, I click the easy button. These are going to show. I can move my paddle. Make sure that you broadcasted hard for the hard mode. So when I click the hard button, nothing should happen. It should just be white. So we're going to go back into our variables, and since we've already created our score variable, we're going to move on. So what we're going to do is the first thing we need to do is we need to get our ball to move around randomly. I need my ball to move all different directions so that my paddle has to work on catching it. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to set score to 0. Because whenever I start the game, the score should start out as 0, no matter what I played last game. And then I'm going to have it go to XY00. Now this location doesn't matter that much because my ball is going to be moving around a lot, but I like starting my stuff out 0, 0. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to make it point in a direction. But I'm not just going to point it in any direction. I'm going to point it in a direction that's not just left and right. And the reason is because when I move it left and right, and then I move it again, if you remember from our cat example earlier in the video, it's just going to move directly left and right, and only left and right if I point it in direction 90. So I'm going to make sure my ball always starts out pointing in a downward or an upward direction that's not just left and right or up and down. So I'm going to have it move to negative 135. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to put in a forever loop. And then I'm going to say move 10 steps. So what it's going to do right now is when I click the green flag and I click easy, it's just going to move 10 steps. And obviously there's a very small problem with this, which is going to be it's off screen and I'm never going to see it again. So what we're going to do is we're going to add our very interesting block, if on edge bounce. So now when I click the green flag and I click easy, it's going to hit the bottom, but it's going to keep bouncing around. And this is going to be really useful because now my ball can move around like crazy or just move around. So the next thing you'll notice is that when I click this, when my ball hits my paddle, it goes straight through my paddle, and that's most definitely not something I want. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say if touching paddle, so I'm going to bring in an if, and I'm going to say if it's touching my paddle sprite, then I'm going to have it point in a different direction. And this is just to add some more chaos. I'm going to have it point in direction, and then we're going to use our operator of pick random. And then we're going to have it pick a random number between negative 80 and 80. So now when I click the green flag, I click the easy mode. When my ball hits this paddle, it's going to go off in a random direction. So now it looks a lot more like an actual Pong game. But the other thing we needed to do is the last step to coding this ball is that we need to change our score. So right now when I start, it's going to hit around the locations and it's going to hit my paddle, but nothing happens to score. So what we're going to do is we're going to change score by 1. Now again, make sure that we're not setting score to 1, we're changing it by 1. Because in this case, we want our score to go up, meaning we don't want it to just stay at 1, we want it to go up to 2, we want it to go up to 3, we want it to keep increasing until the game is over. So as you can see here, my score is just going to keep increasing. Every time my paddle hits the ball, my score goes up. And this would be great, because this is a simple Pong game, we've pretty much finished, except we want to make this game harder. Even though this is easy mode, we want to make this game a little bit more challenging. So what we're going to do is we're actually going to make another ball. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to right click on this, and I'm going to click the duplicate button. And what this is going to do is it's going to create another ball, which is right now has the same code. But what I'm also going to do is I'm actually going to change the costume color. So I'm going to choose a costume. And I'm actually going to pick a different color for this ball, just to show that they're different colors. In this case, I'm going to pick the blue ball. I'm going to delete this color, and now we have 2 different colored balls. And there's one very small problem with this code, which is going to show when I click the green flag. I'm going to click easy mode, and it looks like there's 1 ball. Why? Pause the video and think about it for a second. Why is there only 1 ball? Okay, so if you've unpaused, there actually isn't only 1 ball. There still are 2. The problem with this, though, is that if I bring my paddle in, and it hits, they go off in different directions. And this is because the only time we use random is when we point in direction after touching paddle. So what this means is that since they both start pointing in the same direction, and since they both have the same if on edge bounce, they're going to move in the exact same locations until they hit the paddle, which would be fine, except for the player, it kind of just looks like we didn't do anything. It looks like there's only 1 ball until it hits the paddle. Now there's a slight error in this code that I didn't notice earlier, but it's just going to be, we need to make sure we're setting score to 0 at the beginning of the game. So we're going to set our score to 0, and we need to do this because otherwise as you might have noticed earlier, the score is just going to keep going up no matter how many rounds you want and no matter how many rounds you play, and that's not good. So now when I click the green flag and I click easy mode, the score is going to reset, and we need to make sure that we're setting the right variable to reset. Now back to the problem at hand. Right now they look like they're one ball. And there's a very simple way we can change this. We don't need to change any of this code because the point and direction is random, and as you might have noticed earlier, that means they're going to move in different directions. What we're actually going to do is we're going to have it point in a slightly different direction in the beginning. We can move it a little bit up or a little bit down, but in this case, I'm going to move it to negative 165. And what this does is that even though they start in the same location, they're going to point in slightly different directions, which is going to change everything. So if I click the green flag now, I'm going to actually make sure that it doesn't hit my paddle. What it's going to do is it's going to make them go into completely different directions. And this is great because it adds an element of chaos to the game where it's still playable and it's still decently easy to play, but it's a lot more fun. Now the other thing you might notice is that when it hits the ground underneath, nothing happens. And that's because we haven't programmed anything. In order to make our game a little bit better, what we're going to do is we're going to add a floor. And for the floor, we're going to create a new sprite. So I'm going to go to choose a sprite. We're going to go to paint again. And what I'm going to do is, if you might have noticed from us creating and painting sprites earlier, this entire location is actually going to be the entire playground. So if I create a sprite down here, it's going to create somewhere down here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to manually move my sprite down here. I'm going to move my sprite lower. I'm going to change this so it's thinner. And what this is going to do is it's basically going to create an artificial floor. Now, right now, obviously, they go straight through the floor because we haven't coded anything. But by creating a floor, we can make this problem a lot harder. So for the code for the floor, what we're going to do is when green flag clicked, we're going to leave our floor so that even in our home screen, the floor is going to show up. And we're going to say forever. If touching ball or touching ball 2, so we're going to use our operator. And we're going to say if we're going to bring in our or. So again, the way or works is that if it's touching ball or it's touching ball 2, which means if either one of these things is happening. So if touching ball or touching ball 2, we're going to set the score to 0. And make sure you're setting score to 0. Because what this does is that, first of all, by not making it show up in easy or hard mode, which what that means is since our other sprites, our paddle, our ball, and our ball 2 are all programmed and they start their program when they receive the easy mode broadcast. What this means is that I can have my floor, I'm going to rename this floor, appear for both easy and hard modes. So what that means is that I can leave this code so that it's going to show up even in our home screen. But what it's going to do is it's going to stay there. And then later on, we're going to use this for hard mode, but in easy mode, when I click this and it does that, it's going to hit the ground. And then if either of the balls hit the ground, the score is going to reset. So that makes the game a little bit harder and also makes the user want to go and try and capture the balls. And you know what? We're actually pretty much done. So, in our easy mode code, we covered a couple of concepts. We covered, most importantly, variables. We covered how a variable contains one number, and it's actually pretty simple. And then we also created our easy mode ping pong game, which has 2 balls and resets once it hits the floor. So that's pretty much all there is to our easy mode. Next week, we're going to spend a little bit more time finishing the home screen and creating our hard mode. So thank you for watching.